Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sunday Morning Science. Today we're going to talk about neoteny in humans, and we're going to be comparing this human skull here to these three chimp skulls here. We might even look at this gorilla and some of the other skulls that I have for comparison from time to time throughout this video. But I apologize if you can hear the scuttering of feet outside my office door. My dogs are playing, say. But okay, so here, the really interesting thing about humans versus chimps, of course, is the dramatic difference in the size of the brain. So here in the human skull, the brain case is just dramatically larger. So these are all casts from. These are just casts from bone clones. These are not real skulls, but they're casts from actual individuals. So these are, millimeter to millimeter accurate replicas of skulls. And what I have here is an adult human, an adult chimp, a juvenile chimp, and a baby chimpanzee right here. And a couple of things that we find that are really interesting about these skulls. First of all, is that the adult chimpanzee has this line on the top, which is where the muscles of the jaw attach. The juvenile does not have that. You can actually see there are little lines right here and a line right there. So the muscles of the jaw are attaching to the side of the head. And this is exactly what we see in humans as well. The muscles of the jaw attach to the side of the head instead of coming all the way up top to attach to a crest as they do in chimpanzees. So this is one clue of neoteny that we're going to talk about here. The younger chimp is more like an adult human than an adult chimp is like an adult human. A couple of other things to note here is that humans and chimps have the same number of teeth. And you've probably seen me talk about this on Instagram if you follow me there, or you've heard me talk about this on my other YouTube channel, the Stated Clearly YouTube channel. I've done some work with these skulls there, just in the little posts that you can do periodically. I've never done an actual video on this though, so this is my first time trying to get into the weeds on this with you all. But humans and chimps have the same number of teeth and the same types of teeth. And that might not seem that significant. Maybe you think that all mammals have the same number of teeth, the same types of teeth. But if we look at a dog here, which I could do here in a second here, but they have dramatically different numbers of teeth. So a chimp, the main difference between a chimp's teeth and a human's teeth are, of course, that the canines in a chimp are huge. Look at those giant canines there. In humans, the canines are barely different than the rest of our teeth, or the rest of our incisors. But chimps and humans, they have two sets of incisors. So one set, two set. They have one set of canines on the top, two sets of premolars, and then three molars, just like humans do. The human has the exact same situation going on. And the last molar, the molar in the back there, in humans and in chimps, is what we typically call the wisdom teeth. So I actually don't have mine. Mine were pulled when I was, I think, 17 or 18. But this guy, he grew his, and they came in straight. They didn't mess up his teeth. He has really nice teeth. But got some sand on the desk here. But in chimpanzees, they also grow wisdom teeth, and they grow their wisdom teeth towards the end of puberty. So my juvenile skull here, which I think they believe that he's between 6 and 9 years old, he actually has his wisdom teeth still growing in. You can see that there's just those little holes there. The wisdom tooth is just starting to poke out. And so just like humans, chimpanzees grow their wisdom teeth partly through puberty, or towards the end of puberty. Now, I was just told that my live stream stopped, but I think that that's been fixed. So I'm going to keep going here. So it's really interesting that humans and chimps, they have the same number of teeth and they go through the same developmental stages, but at slightly different times. So the chimpanzee is growing his wisdom teeth at somewhere between 7 and 9 years old, and a human is growing his wisdom teeth typically between, 15 and sometimes like 20 years old. Some people don't even grow wisdom teeth at all; they just never do. Uh, I got a congratulations. Yesterday I got married, so I almost didn't do a live stream today, but I decided, I should probably do one to make sure that, you know, people don't feel neglected on the internet. This, by the way, a little announcement. I am moving, and I will actually not be doing this is going to be my last live stream for the next probably probably until the end of October. I'll start doing them again, just because I'm going to be moving and my life's going to be chaotic. But yes, do you have a Homo floresiensis? Am I saying that right? Model? No, I do not. That would The Bone Clones does make one, and it's really cool. They actually just updated theirs with we now have more bone fragments and stuff. So Bone Clones does make one, but I do not have one. That's actually on my list of things to get someday. So, by the way, if you go to Bone Clones and you buy a skull and you tell them that I sent you there, uh, they'll end up sending me a free skull eventually. So, yeah, if you wanna buy a skull for your own collection, make sure to tell them that I sent you. That's my yeah. They given me, oh, which one did they give me for free? They gave me this one for free because I sent people to them. This is a Tasmanian tiger. It's pretty awesome. But anyway, um, I've just been asked, when do I think modern humans appeared? That's debated. Um, I think the skulls become really modern. I mean, they become really modern, obviously modern by 200,000 years ago, I believe, something like that. But it's really hard to tell because you know there's interbreeding between a lot of these closely related human species early on. So Neanderthals can interbreed with humans. They were doing that, so you might want to consider Neanderthals to be humans. It just it just depends on how you classify things, but the general consensus, I believe, is 200,000 years ago. But I'm actually really bad with dates, so do not quote me on that. I haven't looked that up specifically for today's presentation. Every time I give you guys a date or the specific name of a species, I'm really bad with names and dates, so I actually have to look that up and have it written down on my notes to really make sure that I'm accurate. But I believe it's 200,000 years is we are for sure that's when the modern phenotype of our species was basically solidified in our ancestors. But there's a lot of variation among humans today, and you can actually see that in their skulls. There's this skull here is a male skull from a Western European, um, but you can skulls vary dramatically from population to population and from uh, and throughout history. So even the older skulls that we consider modern humans, they're actually quite a bit different than uh, skulls of people that you would find today. So we're constantly evolving and changing, and not necessarily evolving in a directional way. It's just through genetic drift, different phenotypes end up appearing and becoming popular, and then something else becomes more popular. What is it? Genghis Khan, when he conquered huge portions of Asia, he was spreading his phenotype all over the place as he did so. So you see a pretty dramatic switch in phenotype throughout Asia during his conquests or after his conquests. But so anyway, back to neoteny. So neoteny is this principle in evolutionary biology where a lot of times the way that evolutionary change happens is that a juvenile trait will be expanded and make it into an adult form of an animal. And probably the most obvious example of this is this salamander that you'll find a lot of times in different at the pet store. They're a really cool salamander to keep. Americans usually call them axolotl, but it's a Mexican salamander. They call it axolotl, I think is how they pronounce it, axolotl. But it's a little salamander. Actually, it's a fairly big salamander that retains its gills for its entire life. It never matures and becomes a land animal, and that's a classic example of neoteny in evolutionary biology. And when we look at the genetics, we see that the one of the genes that's important for salamander development is actually just broken in this animal, but it survived that because there's plenty of food in the water, and so it just stays in the water throughout its whole life. So neoteny is really common. Again, it's just when a juvenile trait ends up making it into adulthood. And the really neat thing that I want to show you here is that if we look at the chimp skull and compare it to the human skull, just look at that huge bubble brain that humans have. We just have that giant forehead, the giant cranium there. But if you look at a baby chimp, they are shaped much more like humans are than they are like chimps. Here, let me just compare him to his adult form, and you see that dramatic, difference. The eyebrow has come out. This nice thick bony plate in the forehead has come out. The front of the face has grown forward dramatically to make room for all those giant teeth. And the baby chimp, he's already got that forward growth going on in his skull, and this one's just, I think it's like 9 months old, something like that. And you can see that his canine teeth are not huge yet, like his adult version is. They're just tiny. They're fairly similar to what they look like in humans. They are a little bit bigger than in humans compared to the other teeth, but fairly similar. And he just looks a lot more like a human than it does a chimpanzee. And what we found out, by the way, since I'm streaming on my phone, it's a lot harder for me to keep track of comments. So I apologize if I don't respond to people's questions here. But what we found when we look at how the brain develops in chimps versus in humans is we find that the growth spurt stage of the brain just lasts a lot longer in humans. It actually starts earlier, and it lasts a lot longer. So the human brain, it grows extremely quickly from actually before birth until about 5 years of age. It's growing extremely rapidly. The chimp brain only grows rapidly from before birth until about 2 years of age. At 5 in humans and at 2 in chimps, the brain growth slows quite dramatically. And then at 10 years of age in humans, the brain is actually almost full size. And it pretty much plateaus in growth. And the chimp brain plateaus at 6. So humans, they keep growing their brain until they're 10. Chimps, they only keep growing their brain until they're 6. And then things almost stop. And at that point, pretty much brain size is done. And the only thing that's happening after that, obviously your brain's not fully mature until you're somewhere around 30 years old, but the brain will continue to change internally. Things will be rewired. There's a lot of movement that continues to happen until you're about, like I said, you're about 30 years old. And then the plasticity of the brain in humans dramatically slows down. So learning new things, especially learning new movements, becomes a lot harder once you get older. So once you're in your 30s or so, learning how to skateboard, for example, is going to be way harder for you if you've never done it before than it would be for a 6-year-old. A 6-year-old can get on a skateboard and learn amazing things really quickly, whereas a 30-year-old, they're going to really struggle to learn that. It's not impossible, and we still do have brain plasticity is what it's called. The neurons still can wiggle around inside the brain, move around and do new things, but it becomes a lot more difficult. And with chimps, of course, that solidification happens way earlier. And so the big advantage that we have over chimps is that we continue our youthful growth stage for a much, much longer time. And if you look at the human skull, where our skull is very delicate, it's very baby-like when you compare it to an adult chimpanzee. We're big bald baby apes is what we are. And I find that to be really fascinating. I mean, look at this juvenile. His skull is so much more similar to the human skull. Even you see all of these sutures, these lines in the skull that exist all over it. Those do not exist in the adult chimpanzee. They completely fuse together. It's called suture obliteration. Yet those are still very much present in a human skull. We have all of those sutures, just like the juvenile chimp has. So we have the same teeth, same number of teeth, same types of teeth. Our canines are just way smaller. We have the same number of bones in the skull, and the adult chimp, those all fuse together by the time matured. And the human, they actually will eventually fuse, but usually not until your 40s or 70s. These will start to fuse sometimes in your 40s, sometimes they're still open until you're about 70 years old. So we're very slow maturers. And that has been what's caused our brain to get so large, and for our development to allow us to reach a higher degree of intelligence than our closest relatives can ever obtain. And so this kind of brings up the question as to, if, how difficult was this for evolution to do, really? How is this a really hard transition? And one of the things that a lot of people think mistakenly, and actually serious researchers have thought mistakenly. In fact, there's papers in Nature. There's a paper in Nature where we discovered that in humans there is a gene that codes for muscles in the jaw, and that protein that helps code for muscles in the jaw is broken, and because of that, humans have much smaller jaw muscles than other apes do. And actually, let me see if I can show this to you. Look at this hole here. This hole is where the jaw muscle comes up from the jaw and into the skull, where it attaches up here at the top at the sagittal crest. That hole in chimps is huge. If I compare that in humans, we see that hole is tiny. It's a very, very small hole for a very small jaw muscle. And this mutation that we found in humans is, we think, the reason that muscle is so much smaller in humans than it is in chimps. And it was when it was first discovered, first of all, the interesting thing is that we can actually find in the fossil record where it was that this broke. And I can't remember off the top of my head what species it was where we finally see that it broke. But you can actually pinpoint in the fossil record where this mutation happened. And at that same time, the brain expands rapidly. And so it was mistakenly thought when this discovery was first made that maybe the jaw muscles are keeping the brain small, because the jaw muscles wrap around the skull and stop it from being able to expand. And so it was thought by this group of researchers that in order for the brain to grow, the muscles and the skull have to receive mutations first that allow the brain to expand. Well, people who study development know that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. I mean, just look, this young chimpanzee, he already has his brain's already full size. It's already almost full size. And of course, he does not have muscles reaching to the top of his head that are stopping his skull from growing. So anyone who would just look at young chimps would know that claim is false. The other really interesting thing is that in dogs, when we shrink the front of their face, we shrink the size of the skull where the front of the brain would sit. They have two, I'm forgetting what they're called right now. They're the bulbs that are used for the sense of smell, the parts of the brain. Olfactory bulbs, there we go. And those olfactory bulbs, the spot in the skull for them is shrunk. which means that they need to invade the rest of the space of the skull, which means that the brain box in a flat-faced dog has to be a lot larger. And we see that because of that, they don't develop a sagittal crest. The muscles of their skull only go to the side instead of going all the way to the top like they do in normal dogs. This is actually a wolf here. You see that it has this beautiful sagittal crest where the muscles of the jaw attach on top. And you see that in flat-faced dogs, that sagittal crest doesn't fully form. And the reason for that is that the brain is dictating the size of the skull. The brain is king when it comes to, skull growth. The brain, as it pushes on the inside of the skull will grow to accommodate the brain. And this is most dramatic, of course, in the case where we do skull binding. So this is a human who was skull bound, and the skull binding happened when she was an infant, and it was wrapped around this way. And so the skull could not expand forward or in the back, and because of that, it expanded on the top. And you have this insane expansion of the skull. Her brain cavity is the same size as a normal human's brain cavity. The brain dictated the size of the skull. And so the muscles, the genetics of the skull are not dictating the shape and size of the brain. The brain is dictating the size of the skull and the placement of the muscles on the skull. The brain has precedence. It's the first priority, you could say, during development. And so all you have to do really to get, so far as we know, all you have to do to get a chimp to have a brain like a human is just expand that growth period during development of the brain. And the rest of the face and the skull should conform to the brain size. The muscles of the jaw should conform to the brain size, and it should be able to work. It should be able to. Now, we don't understand fully the genetics that are involved in that, and getting the brain development schedule to change like that. So we can't induce this in chimps, and so far as I know, nobody's trying, but it would be interesting. You could actually get a chimp that's as smart as a human. I don't know what you would do with that afterwards, but it should technically be possible to engineer a chimp to be as smart as a human, but you'd have to do it when they're babies. You can't give them a magic potion like they do in or not a magic potion. You can't give them like some intelligence potion like they do in Planet of the Apes. But you'd have to do it during development, and they would have a giant skull and a giant head. But it's really, really interesting that the main difference between humans and chimps is just a shift in the developmental periods of the brain. That's pretty much it. And we retain juvenile features, even in our jaw and in our teeth. We maintain these juvenile features of chimpanzees up into adulthood. Now, I should point out that we did not evolve from chimpanzees. Humans and chimps shared a common ancestor. And it's when we look at the fossil record, we can't say for sure what that common ancestor was, for the same reason that if you went to a family reunion and you didn't know who your grandpa was, and you met two guys that were the right age to be your grandpa, you wouldn't be able to tell for sure which one was actually your grandpa. So when we look in the fossil record, we can't tell exactly which organisms are the actual ancestors of a modern species. If you look at an evolutionary tree, they always put them on a side branch because there's always that uncertainty there. But the organisms that were alive at the time where we think the common ancestor of humans and chimps should be, they're very chimp-like. They're a lot more chimp-like than they are human-like. So this expansion of the brain happened specifically in the human lineage, and it dramatically changed us. It made us what we are. And it's really obvious to see it in the fossil record because it's just such a big, obvious change in morphology. Now, so what I've said here, just to kind of summarize here, is that humans and chimps, the main difference is that there's a difference in the timing of the brain development that lets our brain get way larger. And that difference actually starts before birth. So we're born with brains that are larger than chimps, and then we continue to grow those large brains, uh, until we're about 10 years old, and then the growth stops. But uh, losing my train of thought here. So that's the main difference is just brain growth, and the question is, why is it that chimps never? If the mutation is that easy, if all you have to do is have a mutation that changes the growth schedule of the brain, if that's really all you need, and it's probably multiple mutations, but if that's all you really need, why haven't other animals undergone this change? You don't need special mutations in the skull. You don't need special mutations in the jaw muscles. You really just need mutations that affect the brain. Why have all of the other apes stayed at the level where they are? And the reason that we think that is calorie intake. In order to grow a brain, you have to feed it a lot of calories. We consume massive amounts of energy with our brains, and we have to consume that all the time. You can't just put the brain on idle. You do a little bit when you sleep, but you really can't shut the thing off, and it's extremely expensive. We think that there's good reason to think that before we could grow brains like this, we had to have mastered, hunting and gathering to a degree that's not rivaled by other apes. And we probably had to have invented fire first and started using fire to cook and process food. Using fire dramatically, it unlocks tons of nutrients, especially macronutrients like sugars and proteins become much easier to process by our digestive system once we heat up our food. The fire just really helps break down those complex carbohydrates and the different proteins and stuff that are in our food, and that just unleashes a bunch more nutrients. So we probably had to master fire before our brains could explode to the size that they have in modern times, and that may have been a big key that other apes just have never done. Interestingly, you can you can you can teach a chimp or a bonobo to make fire, and they'll learn it pretty well, but they have major issues in controlling it. And I think, you know, it's somehow we were able to learn how to control it. And someone just mentioned that the big differences in language. It might have been. We don't know what the key innovation was that allowed the spiral of the brain and size, but yeah, it might have been fire first. It might have been language first, but the language would have helped us better manage fires. We could work in groups to manage fire. Maybe early on we were collecting fires from just natural forest fires and keeping them going, and we would have had to coordinate efforts to keep those fires going before we learned to start them ourselves. Like I said, chimps, they can learn how to build a fire, but well, bonobos can. I haven't seen it done with a chimp, but they just don't know how to control them. You have one thing that's really funny is that you have chimps have been taught to smoke, and they can actually light a cigarette. And if you give them a lighter, or if you give them another cigarette that's lit, they'll use it to light theirs. It's just really just interesting to see. But so yeah, so there is a lot of debate as to what sparked the spiral of growth in the human brain. But one thing that we do know is that all you need really are mutations that affect the brain, and the skull will come along with it. The muscles of the face will come along with it. They will compensate for an expansion of the skull. So, yes, the origins of humans, our human intelligence, it really is a mystery, but we know that uh, the mutations don't seem to be that great that had to occur, and we know that one of the big selection pressures against having big brains would have been calorie intake. Other apes cannot maintain high enough calorie intake to maintain a brain like we do. And so fire must have been important early on to allow us to be able to process food better and expand our skulls and brains the way that we did. So being asked that if chimps increased in brain size, would they learn how to use fire? It's not clear. So we have just increasing the size of the brain isn't necessarily going to make you better or more interested in fire versus other things. So